it is for them. And they have tears in their eyes, and they tell their friends, and their friends come, and suddenly word has gotten out. And for me, it is the answer to such deep, deep prayers. For me, it's been humbling, and I've had to apologize to the industry of hunting because they do care. They really do care, and they love this process. And my buffalo are honored. So I've kind of been going on here for a little while, but I hope that was more of what you wanted to know.
Yeah, it was perfect. And how many times do you do this sacred hunt a year? I mean,
well, this year we have done 30, and next year we anticipate we will probably do in the vicinity of about 50. And that's a large number, so we are committed pretty much November through February. We will end our season this coming weekend.
How big? So I understand your herd's about 200 head, and once at one point in time there was just an incredible amount of buffalo on the North American plains. How big do you see your herd getting at one point?
Well, pardon?
Oh, please continue.
We have 3,000 acres, and as I'm able to raise money and actually fence that property, then we can expand that area into buffalo grazing land. We only have not quite 2/3 of the ranch is even fenced in buffalo. So I anticipate that as we can build the buffalo fence, it's very, very expensive. It's we now have pretty close to $200,000 worth of just fencing in the ranch itself. As we can expand that, we can do a few more buffalo, but not so many more. I don't really want to grow much bigger than 200 because the herd starts to split up into more families, and I'd rather keep them in one group, because where one goes, they will all go now. And if you have many more than that, when there were millions of buffalo, literally, that used to cross these hills, there are old buffalo horn caps and so forth that we would see. But that was the inspiration that I had, was the memory of some of the elder women here who told me the stories that their grandmother would tell them before the Wachichu came, when they would literally watch them pass for days. It would take a herd of buffalo days to pass through this country. That was just inconceivable to me. But so we will probably, try and keep our herd fairly small, and the number will probably be between 30 and 50 per year, and we are already booking for next fall and the year after that.
Mm-hmm. Will you describe a little bit more about your relationship with the buffalo? For example, what you were talking about, how you get them to move to different parts of the pasture.
Well, when we started out with the buffalo, we just had a handful, and we had them very close to the house, and I was like a mother hen, and I was terrified of them. I'd heard all the stories, they're dangerous, they're dangerous. Well, our herd was very young, but nonetheless, and yet I love animals, and in order to care for them, and we were feeding them hay, and so we were with them all the time, and we would take vegetables out of the garden, and we would go down in a pickup, and we would feed them vegetables and just sit with them for the longest time. And as a consequence, we got to know them so intimately and watch them. And, how were we going to move them, when we got another pasture fence? How were we going to get them between one pasture and the next? We had no idea how we were going to make buffalo move, because buffalo go where buffalo want to go, and that's it. You don't convince them of anything. So we began very early on, because I'd talk to them all the time, and I would go out and I would pray and sit on the hill with them and just thank the Creator for them and thank them for being here and all the blessings they were bringing. And as a consequence, that dialogue just kind of took up. And as it turned out, we ended up talking to the buffalo, and to find out that the buffalo would respond. And when we would open a gate and we would need them to go into the next pasture, I found that if I would send them pictures of them going to the gate, and I would just ask them, I would talk through my mind's eye and just send them messages, please move into the other pasture so this one can rest. And we started this process of being able to communicate with them telepathically. And it was proven time and time again for us that that worked. Well, because I'm native and because I walk, somewhat of the native path, and I live on the res, well, that's rather acceptable for here. But out in the bigger world, when I joined the National Bison Association, I would go to the national conferences to learn more about buffalo and raising buffalo. I couldn't really talk about those kinds of things because these big old ranchers, looking at me, a woman, and so forth, and my small little herd, and they had these big herds, and they would just smile at me, yeah, sweetheart, uh-huh. And one year they brought in a speaker. He was a famous, and to this day I cannot remember his name, and I have called them and asked them what his name was. But he was a famous animal handler. He was responsible for many of the famous handling facilities for large wild reserves and so forth. And he came and he demonstrated over a course of 2 days all the different kinds of handling facilities that could be implemented and all the different ways you can run them around on four-wheelers. Some people can actually use horses, and some people use vehicles. And here up to this point, we'd only done, at this point, we had started moving them on foot. They would go to places, and they would break out of their pastures, and I would end up having to go and get them, and there was no way we could drive there. So I would go there, and I'd get behind them and say, come on, we got to go home, and they'd go, and I'd walk them home. I ended up walking hundreds of miles with my buffalo because they got out often before we got our fences up. And again, this just renewed this relationship with them. And at the end of the conference, this man stood up and he said, you can have all these facilities, you can spend millions of dollars on whatever methods you want, but I'm going to tell you that the buffalo, still carries its ancient DNA, much like the shark, the dolphin. It still has its ability to understand and to work in a collaborative way. And he said the number one best way to work with buffalo is telepathically. They hear you, and they will respond. If you collaborate and cooperate and honor them, they will do the same to you. And I nearly cried. I couldn't believe it. He had just said the very thing that I didn't dare to say, and he said it publicly, and he said it to many, many, many ranchers from all over the nation.
I'm curious, Tana, how did the other ranchers respond to that?
At the time, I would have to say, I don't think they heard him.
Interesting.
I don't think they heard him. I was very happy. And what has happened as an evolution since, because I've now gone back and to these conferences, and what has now happened is many of the things that we're doing are starting to get recognition. And now when I tell my stories, there are more of them that listen, and now more of them that actually come and talk to me. And when I talk, it started out as kind of sweet stories because I'm native, and somehow when a native tells a story about prayer or working with buffalo or animals, then it seems to be, well, yeah, that's okay, but not when it comes to, let's say, the regular, white man, let's say, the white man, white woman working with animals. It doesn't seem to be, as quite as acceptable if they do it. Then they kind of have to really stay quiet about it. And what I have found now is that it has become much more acceptable because the buffalo growers in America, I think, are in the business because they love the buffalo. But what they have done is they have followed industry standard and industry guidance, and the only industry that was guiding them was the cattle industry. And I think now, and I went to the conference in January, and many of them came and talked to me because many of them now know that my stories have been corroborated and collaborated, and they're true. And they come to me and very quietly step aside with me, and they say, I love my buffalo. I hate this system. I hate the way I have to do things. I hate that I have to take my buffalo to feedlots where they're probably going to get sick, where they're going to have to